Hi, I'm Marie Hopkinson, Chinese medicine practitioner, and today I'm going to be answering some questions from the comment section. Particularly today, we're going to be talking about spleen yang or spleen qi deficiency, both of those conditions. Now, one of the reasons why I've made this channel is to spread out the word of the good things that Chinese medicine can do in the self-help domain, and sometimes that has to come from when you've already got a diagnosis. So you might be searching this channel or searching YouTube or the internet or something, and you might already know that you have spleen qi deficiency, or you have been told you've got spleen yang deficiency, and that's a very common traditional Chinese medicine TCM diagnosis. In the past couple of years, I've sort of moved away from traditional Chinese medicine and moved towards what we call classical Chinese medicine. So I'm going to pop a link, or there'll be a link up the top. You can click that video for more info about what that is. But you might also find out what that is through the course of this video as well, because so I'm going to go through this guy's comment, and he said, this is in response to one of my dampness videos. So he said, I have spleen yang deficiency with wind damp. I tried acupuncture with stomach 36 and stomach 40 points, herbs and cut out sugar. He doesn't say what herbs he's taking. And then he says, I take leek, ginger, parsley, white cashew nuts and black pepper as my main meals. And then he goes on and gives some more information. So we'll just cover that bit first. Now, what is spleen yang or spleen qi deficiency? So you might have some symptoms like bloating, feeling a bit sick after eating, feeling full after eating. So what it means is that your spleen energy, so it's not your spleen organ as a singular organ, but it's the organ system in Chinese medicine. So what that means is that the spleen itself, okay, we have to edit that bit out. So what it means is the spleen organ system, which really is the functional system of digestion in Chinese medicine. Now, I'll put another link to a different video, and you can click on that one and watch the digestive process. So I've made that video called Why Should You Eat Mostly Cooked Foods? And if you haven't seen that video yet, then that's one of the most important videos you could ever watch on my channel, I think, and certainly the most popular video that I've done so far as well. And I think that's because it's a big part of TCM diet therapy is to explain that process, and it does take about 20 minutes to explain that properly and in a thorough way so that you actually understand it. So that's why I've made that video. Anyway, so this guy says he's got spleen yang deficiency with wind damp. That was his diagnosis. Now, I'm sure he wasn't just using those 2 points. Maybe he's a TCM person himself, like a practitioner or something like that, or a student. And so possibly though, now there's nothing wrong with any of that treatment. So that's a good treatment strategy in terms of those points are good. That you, as an acupuncturist, they'd probably use different points. And the diet that he's using, I mean, I think it's probably not a wise idea to have the exact same food every single time that you eat, because I'm not sure if that's what he means by that, or he puts that in his food, or he eats that exact same meal. Because you're just not going to get the nutritional requirements if you just eat the same thing every day. Like I love potatoes, but I can't eat potatoes every day. Just that's the only meal you have. So you eating a balanced diet in terms of like foods that are in season. But that's probably a whole nother thing to talk about, that exact concept. But what I do want to tackle today is spleen yang deficiency, spleen qi deficiency. How does TCM treat it? How does classical Chinese herbs or classical Chinese medicine treat it? What's the difference there? So this video hopefully won't take too long. It'll be a concise video. I'm doing my best to not speak too quickly, but also make the videos not too long-winded either. So I really appreciate people's comments. Appreciate people taking the time to make a comment, to a like, share the videos, that kind of stuff. That's great. So when you comment and you like and subscribe and things like that, it helps YouTube, the computer system, the algorithm of YouTube, see that my videos are valuable to people, and it will show them to more potential people. So simply by writing a comment or liking the video, YouTube thinks it's more popular, which it would be, and they will show it to more people. So that's your way of being able to help me, and I really appreciate people who do that. Now I've got that out of the way. If you haven't subscribed already, click that subscription button. What are you doing? Don't wait any longer. It takes 10 seconds to subscribe to a channel. And so what we're going to talk today about is spleen yang deficiency. Now, the symptoms. So spleen qi is the energy of the spleen. And the yang in TCM is also the energy, but a more of a warmth energy. And this is why one of the reasons I sort of moved away from TCM, because in classical Chinese medicine, we think of more in terms of things of yin and yang rather than qi, like less about qi. So with the functional aspects of qi are yang functions anyway. So I tend to talk about maybe people would have their digestive, so that the spleen and stomach are part of what we call the earth element. So in the 5 element system, you have wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And the earth element is the center of your body, and your spleen is part of that. So if someone's given you that diagnosis of spleen qi or spleen yang deficiency, what they're saying is your digestive system's lacking the functional ability to digest the food properly, the proper way it can. So a lot of symptoms people have are things like food intolerance, which means they'll say, oh, I'm fine, I don't have any symptoms. But if I eat like dairy, I get bloated, or I get gas, or I get diarrhea, or I get a lot of painful in my guts, or I don't feel very good, I feel uncomfortable. If I eat gluten, I feel those symptoms as well. Or some people get reflux, so they get symptoms more in their stomach more than their actual bowels. So how do we know if our digestive system's functioning well? Because when you eat the food, it should just pass through you as a solid mass in terms of your stools, nice and easily, not as in properly formed, not hard to pass, not difficult, not like to the end of the spectrum being loose and watery, or the other end of the spectrum being really hard and dry and constipated and maybe not even able to go. So the frequency should be once a day, properly formed, easy to come out. And then it's something in any variance from that means that your spleen is struggling with what you put in it, or your spleen's so weak, it doesn't matter what you put in it, it's just struggling. And then it gets even worse if you have those particularly difficult to eat foods. Now, the thing that a nutritionist or a dietitian or a naturopath may be able to help you with more than an acupuncturist or a Chinese herbalist is actually coming up with a diet structure that's like meeting all of your dietary requirements. So for instance, your vitamins and minerals content, and it's nutritionally balanced and all that sort of stuff. What a Chinese medicine practitioner can do, an acupuncturist or a herbalist, now not all herbalists and acupuncturists really practice Chinese diet therapy, but they are trained in it usually in school, they learn about it, is what foods are good for your particular condition. So we're going to answer this guy's question today. He's asking any ideas about his stuff. So he says he exercises, so he's the spleen yang deficiency guy with wind damp. Now wind damp, typically, I don't know his symptoms, but the typically would be in the channels. So that might be because wind tends to move around, so pain that moves around, and dampness is going to give you a heaviness in the channels, which means in the joints or the muscle. So he may have some muscular aches or stuff like that. Now in TCM, the spleen system is responsible for the muscles and the 4 limbs. So what that means is that a person with damp and a spleen qi deficiency means that their body just gets really heavy. They get overcome with damp, and they just basically just get very heavy and lethargic, and it's very common. So there's another video I made about what is dampness and the foods associated with dampness. That when you eat those particular foods, that you notice those symptoms of dampness, you get really overcome with heaviness. And another symptom of dampness that's very common is this cloudy, muzzy headedness. So you get like this horrible cloudy, muzzy head, like you just feel not really dizziness, but are feeling like your thoughts aren't really clear, or your brain isn't clear, like you're in a brain fog. Similar to like people who feel that sluggishness might feel first thing in the morning, and then it kind of gets better as the day goes on, and they're okay, off they go. But if you've got cloudy headedness, dampness, then it might just last all day, then it really kind of goes away. So this guy says he's taking herbs, and the typical spleen qi deficiency treatment in Chinese medicine doesn't really address the true underlying cause of the problem, which is the declining of yang. So spleen, when in TCM, when we're given the diagnosis spleen qi deficiency, and it's not the fault of the practitioner, it's the fault of the system. It's not like as in the system of TCM's kind of moved away from that. And what's happened, rather than making this video super long-winded, but there has been shifts throughout history in the focus of Chinese medicine. And there was a school of thought in TCM, the spleen and stomach school, they called it. And that was like, everything's caused by that. Everything's caused by diet. Everything's caused by the failure of that spleen and stomach. And in some aspects, that's very true. But underpinning that is the fact that as we age, our body loses its yang, it loses its fire. And so therefore the herbs that we use, so the concept's correct, but the herbs that are used in TCM aren't warm enough, they're not hot enough to actually restore that fire. Whereas the herbs that are used in classical Chinese medicine typically are very hot yang tonic type of herbs, and they can get in there and boost up that yang. Now, what's happened over the years, not in the recent years, but over the thousands of years of use of Chinese medicine, is people lost the ability to utilize those yang tonic herbs in a correct way. So they had a lot of side effects, they weren't used properly, and so then they became scared of using them and adverse to kind of using them. So they do need more skill of a practitioner to use them than the other type of tonic herbs, or damp treating herbs, let's say. And what I find, because I practiced TCM for many, many years with no problems at all, and certainly lots of patients got better and lots of effects happened. But what I found is that because spleen Qi deficiency is a very, very common diagnosis, partly because our Western diet just causes it, and then in addition to that, sitting around a lot causes a liver qi stagnation situation. So you just kind of, people are getting stagnant, and their yang is declining, and their spleen isn't working properly, and their digestion's essentially overwhelmed by too much stuff coming in. We eat too much food. I mean, I'm guilty of that as well. I love food. It's just that part of our culture, and it's also I guess part of availability of food. It's not natural that you can just think of something in your mind. I don't think it's natural. And then bang, it just rocks up at your door that you've called, a food company to drop it at your door. Or, prior to that, you could just go to a 24-hour sort of McDonald's or whatever and get food. And I'm just saying the increased availability of food at any old times and all that sort of stuff. And it's great. Convenience is great. I'm not against convenience. I'm just saying that's part of what's caused these problems. And actually in society, if you look back into different periods in history, for our Western culture in Australia, people were at their healthiest in the post-war depression time, when they had scarcity of food. They didn't have enough food, but we had less cardiovascular disease. We had less these chronic diabetes and those kinds of illnesses, because people were eating more grains and less processed foods, and the scarcity of food meant that you didn't eat as much quantity of food. Anyway, so that's probably for another topic. Let's get back to this guy's question. So he says that he's done herbs. And so my thing with that is that, you may have tried herbs, and I'm not trying to point this out. I'm just using this as an example so that I can answer this guy's question, but also the reason why I'm doing it like this is because I know this is a very common problem, and there's probably a lot of people out there with a very similar thing going on. So I hope this will help other people with spleen yang deficiency, spleen qi deficiency type of symptoms. And because it sounds like this guy's doing everything he can, and it sounds like he's doing all good stuff, and he's doing really well, right? So he says he exercises 4 days a week. 6 months gone by of regular acupuncture every second week and herbs, and still the same symptoms of very foggy head, swollen tongue, weak and heavy arms and legs. Now, what I would say is, okay, what's the formula that he's taking? So that would be one question to work out, because 6 months of taking herbs, you should notice some shifts in there. And certainly in the system that I practice, we would have gotten to some kind of shift by now, we would hope. Now, we can't guarantee anything, and I'm not trying to come across as you haven't tried my medicine, that's the reason why it's not. It's just, it is a different system. And for years and years I practiced TCM, and they would give you things like Xiaoyasan and Kanga de Tang and different formulas that I'm not sure what I mean, for this kind of situation, I'd probably, in my TCM days, I probably would have used something like Wendun tongue. And I used to find good results from those things for those kind of cloudy headedness, but it never got to the end result of it. Never got to the root of the problem. So what would happen is the patient would get, and sometimes you can get a relief of symptoms, so they go away, but then it just never really completely resolves, or it does, because what those herbs can do is they can shift the stagnation that's there, and they can mobilize the chi a little bit, but they can't actually restore. There's a difference between alleviating the symptoms, I guess, or just getting things moving for a lot of people. And this is very common when you first do an acupuncture session or acupuncture treatment strategy. You start to feel really good straight away, and some of that may be placebo as well, because you've got this hope that it's going to work, and it's something new that you're trying, and that's all good. And then it just kind of plateaus out a little bit, I guess. So yeah, I've kind of replied to him already and said I can help you find another practitioner that does the different style of herbs that I do, the classical style of herbs, which I would suggest he'd go. That would be the best thing next. So his symptoms that he says is the same. He's got the very foggy head, the swollen tongue. So that's a very common symptom of spleen qi deficiency. So how that happens is, in TCM, they say that as your body can't metabolize fluids, the fluids start to overflow. So the tongue grows big and puffy, and then you bite down on the tongue and you get these things called tooth marks. So they'll often say you've got a teeth-marked tongue or a tooth-marked tongue, or a scalloped tongue. That's another way of talking about it. So if the tongue's very, very fat or puffy or swollen, then the next stage is you're biting down on that and you're getting the tooth marks. So if you came into a practitioner and you had the tooth marks, and then if things were getting better, your symptoms would be getting better too. But then you'd look at your tongue and it might be swollen but not teeth marked, so that might be something to think of. And your tongue takes a long time to change, a long time. It doesn't change very quickly, and that's one of the reasons why I don't use it in the style of Chinese herbs I practice. We don't use the tongue diagnosis very often. We use it for some conditions, but we always go by the pulse diagnosis, because your pulse is changing, hour by hour in some cases, depends on what's wrong with you. But it's changing it's instantaneously reflecting what's going on. So it's actually reflecting what's going on exactly at that moment in your body. Whereas your tongue is saying something, but we can't tell necessarily whether what it's saying is something that's happened now or something that's happened in the past that's no longer an issue for you. And that's a big thing in TCM, where there's often this thing where the tongue and the pulse don't always line up. And so practitioners, especially student practitioners, often say, well, my pulse diagnosis must not be very good then, so I'll rely on the tongue because that's more objective. And one aspect of thinking is that, that could be true. But then if they keep thinking like that, then they never really get their pulse diagnosis better, or they never improve it, because they are constantly doubting that it's good and everything. And that's normal for a lot of TCM practitioners, and certainly for a lot of years in my practice when I did mostly musculoskeletal acupuncture conditions. I did a lot of that for a few years. I didn't use the pulse diagnosis very much. I used it, but I didn't rely upon it. Not as I do now. So it's almost impossible for me to treat someone without checking their pulse. So if this guy doesn't live nearby me, I'll have to refer him to someone near him that does our system. Otherwise, can't really help people if we don't check your pulse. And so that would be my next question, is when we check your pulse, it will essentially tell us what the main thing is here. Now, he's got two main symptoms going on here, two main mechanisms happening. One is the dampness mechanism, and the other thing is the deficiency, the underlying deficiency. And your pulse will tell the practitioner what needs to be treated first. So if, for instance, with acupuncture, you do an acupuncture treatment and you feel super tired afterwards, a lot of people who with spleen qi deficiency feel really tired, or especially spleen yang deficiency, they feel really wiped out after a treatment. And there's a thing in acupuncture where we think there's certain feelings in the pulse that are needed to be able to do acupuncture. So the pulse needs to have a certain amount of strength to it. If it's really super weak, it's sometimes not a good idea to do acupuncture. You need to do either moxa first, which is the second thing I'd suggest to this guy, as if his practitioner isn't doing that already. Moxibustion is a warming treatment, so it's really the only thing acupuncture's got to offer to someone who's very cold, because acupuncture can't put a substance in your body. So if you're yang deficient, your body's going to be cold. Your limbs will be cold, or you'll feel the cold very easily, and you probably, like, your digestive system itself is usually cold. Now, sometimes people can get so deficient, and this isn't really a TCM way of thinking, it's more of a classical Chinese medicine way of thinking, is that your yang gets so weak that it starts to float outwards, and so the person can appear very hot and warm. They can appear very like in TCM they might call them yin deficient, because they've got this floating yang. But in Chinese medicine, they say, in classical Chinese medicine, we'd say that they're still yang deficient, but their body's not cold, their body's very warm, and so their hands might feel really warm, and they might really hate, they don't really like the cold either. They just like a certain amount of temperature, and they get hot flushes easy and feel warm to the touch and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm getting a bit off track here. So he says he exercises 4 days a week, 6 months gone by, regular acupuncture every second week, herbs, and still the same symptoms of foggy head, swollen tongue, weak and heavy arms and legs, low muscle tone, and inability to gain weight. So that's saying that so your spleen, when it starts to malfunction, it's not working properly, then either you'll gain a lot of weight, like if people with dampness can be very overweight, very obese, puffy, that kind of thing, or they have a tendency for that to happen. And this all depends on diet too. Like, your diet's going to make a difference if you can potentiate that more or less with diet. And then the fact that he's exercising regularly is good, that he's keeping his body healthy. And the fact that he exercises 4 days a week means he's got enough energy to do the exercise. He doesn't say he's like super exhausted afterwards. He says I'm 6'4" and 70 kilos, quite thin. And so that's a probably more of a cold type of deficiency, I'd say. Like, it's hard for me to say unless I feel his hands and stuff, but if his body feels really cold, and certainly if you don't put on weight, then you can't retain the heat, so in winter you feel really easily feeling really freezing. Yeah, so he's not putting on weight, and so he's probably very thin and cold. So I would suggest that if your acupuncturist could do moxa on those points, on the stomach 36, or on your abdomen. There's a little thing that we use called the moxa box, which is basically just warms the points on the abdomen. That can help as well. To basically, you need to warm the yang. So foods wise, I'm not sure which end of this end of the planet you live on. If you're coming into winter now, if you're in like I'm in Australia, we're coming into winter. Then it's autumn now, so the seasonal attunement of foods are basically adding more pungent and adding more warm into the food, so a little bit more hot and spicy, not too much. Oh, that's what I was thinking of, right. So exercising 4 days a week, the hot and spicy got me thinking about that. So the other thing is, so he's got the energy to do the exercise, but the thing when you do, in Chinese medicine, they really don't think overworking anything is a good idea. So it's about conserving energy, not overworking energy. So it's good to keep your body active. It's not good to sit around on the couch all day and do nothing, or sit in your job and sit at your desk and do no exercise. And certainly he says he's tried yoga and stretching and things like that. That's good. But depending on what kind of exercise you do, then I would look at how much you sweat. So this is another idea that comes more in classical Chinese medicine. When you sweat, your body's losing fluid, and so that can dry you out. But also within that fluid, it's a yin substance, but containing that fluid is some yang. So you're depleting your yang more by sweating. The more you sweat, the more you deplete your body. So like, you can dehydrate from sweating too much. So if someone runs a marathon or something and they can't get the fluids back in their body as quick as they are losing them, then they can die from sweating their fluids out. You can die from vomiting your fluids out, from having your fluids come out through your bowels or urination or something like that. So sweating too much and regularly sweating, I see a lot of patients like this that exercise a lot. They get dryness, so their muscles get dry. And it says here, one of your comments here says you feel really stiff in your legs and hamstrings where the spleen and stomach channels run. So yeah, okay, yoga's good, except for don't do the sweating yoga, the Bikram yoga, stay away from that. And exercise wise, if you're doing really heavy duty, how much are you sweating each time you do exercise? If you're doing super heavy duty exercise, I would stop doing that or back that off. And particularly if it's coming into winter, like definitely back that off. So in Chinese medicine, this is in the Neijing, it says that you should only sweat for like 10 minutes in this concept of don't sweat too much. Basically, don't only sweat for around 10 minutes in winter time, which means in summer, it's the season of yang coming to the outside of your body. So the yang is on the surface. You're very warm. It's easy to sweat. It's normal to go outside and feel hot and flushed if it's a hot sunny day and to sweat. Whereas in winter, it's the opposite of that. Everything's coming in and being in a state of being stored. So for you to go and push your body so hard in winter, and exercise really hard at the gym, let's say in an artificial environment, or even outside when it's really cold, a lot of people who are high level exercising people, they feel, I've got to stay fit, I've got to keep exercising. So winter's a season of hibernation. It's a season of nourishment. It's a season of like letting your body have a rest. And if you're already like you're not overweight, and so my advice for this guy would be, if it's winter time, just have a rest. Don't do too much exercise. Maybe do yoga, keep the stretching up, so don't do nothing at all. But don't feel like you have to push yourself too hard with that kind of stuff. Now, another food that's really good, and you're already doing some of it, is the ginger and leek, is pungent foods. So pungent foods are opening and moving and spreading, and they're usually warm. So cinnamon, pepper, like Sichuan pepper is really good, especially if you have pain. Sichuan pepper is a good food for treating pain in herbs. It's a herbal medicine that's used in a lot of formulas where you see Sichuan pepper used. There's pain in those conditions. So hopefully this is answering your particular question, but also answering some other people who have spleen Qi deficiency or spleen Yang deficiency. I guess in a TCM sense, the difference between spleen Qi deficiency and spleen Yang deficiency is in spleen Yang deficiency, the diarrhea is worse. The stools are like really loose. It's maybe very hard to keep the liquid into the body, so they may go very frequently. They have this thing called cockcrow diarrhea, like wanting to wake up first thing in the morning and have very loose runny stools. You more tendency towards that. Spleen Qi deficiency has a lot more like sort of bloating, feeling uncomfortable, and feeling like your bowels are loose for sure, but maybe not as bad. It gets worse in the spleen Yang deficiency. And then from there, sometimes with the spleen Yang being weak, you can get prolapses. You can get things like varicose veins. You can get like hemorrhoids. You can get prolapse organs, things like that. Now, not everyone who has spleen Yang deficiency gets prolapses, but that's where it goes sometimes. So then I've given him a little answer there, similar to this answer, but less long-winded, I guess. And then he said, I've got a large crack down the middle of my tongue along with scalloped sides. Yep, so that's what we talked about before, the swollen tongue with the tooth marks. It's pale in colour, which would indicate stomach and spleen Qi deficiency with a lot of dampness. So I don't know about your pulse because you haven't told me your pulse there, but it means, look, if your tongue's pale, it's more of a blood deficiency problem. So it means that there's also blood's deficient. And that can give you like blurry vision, dizziness, or lightheadedness more than dizziness, pale skin, dry skin. And that blood deficiency is very much linked with that yang deficiency stuff where, so blood holds the yang in classical Chinese medicine. So blood's warm, right? If blood's cold, then it's dead blood. It's not healthy blood. Okay. Then he goes on and says, I've had it for 15 years, so I hope it doesn't take just as long to heal. Now that's a really good point. So yeah, it does take a long time. He's been doing the treatment for 6 months, so I'd say to encourage him to keep sticking with it. But if you can get in contact with me and through email, I'll put you onto a practitioner, hopefully that's near you. Hopefully we can find, there's a lot of people in the US that do this system, and there's quite a few in the UK. There's heaps in Australia as well. There's quite a few over different parts of Europe. So there's people all over the world that do this, the classical herbs system that I do. He says, I've had it for 15 years and I hope it doesn't take as long to heal. I'm a vegan, so no diet, no dairy or meat for me. I do get enough calories and protein through sesame seeds, sunflower oil, basmati rice, etc. Now I'm laughing a little bit because a vegan diet is typically a cold diet. So I would encourage you to go and look at my video about mostly cooked foods and watch that video. So I'm not saying we can't help you if you're vegan. Like, okay, I have tons of patients that have come in vegan and they've changed their ways a little bit. They've gone and had some bone broth. I've had some patients who are vegan, they refuse to change. And we just work with the best that we can with people. But I get what you're saying. The next bit you say, I turned vegan 4 years ago and my digestion feels a lot better since I quit meat, fish, eggs and dairy. I rarely cough up phlegm, which used to be a daily occurrence. So this is a really common thing, and I might have to make another video about vegan and Chinese medicine, because there are some situations where when you change to being vegan, you will feel better because what you were having before wasn't the best foods. But what I will say is, no matter what your diet is, if it's vegetarian, vegan, meat eater, whatever, you must have mostly cooked foods, not too much raw. So the worst diet of a vegan would be like the very cold and raw smoothies, lots of cold and raw. So not all vegans have that, I understand that, but it is a common thing with vegans to go on to cold and raw stuff. And in Chinese medicine, it's not just about like getting protein, it's not just about getting nutrients, it's about the quality of the foods. So it's very hard to show an argument for veganism giving you the same amount of yang. Like literally yang is the life force that comes out of the meat, so you cannot get that from vegetables and nuts and stuff. So you don't have to have as much meat as most. I'm Australian, I'm pretty sure Americans have worse consumption of meat, but the average Australian has too much meat. Average. You don't need to eat that much meat, and certainly things like meat pies, sausage rolls, that sort of processed meat, mince meat, that kind of stuff is terrible. And if anything, if you're not vegan for ethical reasons, if you can manage to do some bone broth, I would do that. You could even buy it pre-packaged. That's better than nothing at all. Go to an organic butcher and buy the bones and brew it up yourself. That would be a start to put some more nourishment in you. And if you can manage to have that, I think you might start to feel a little bit better. So yeah, it's not just about the calories, and it's certainly not about the protein, because there's you can get enough protein from vegetable and plant compounds, but it's vegetable and plant stuff is a lot cooler. Even before you've cooked it, it's a lot cooler than meat. So meat before you've cooked it is a lot warmer, and then you cook it and it becomes even more warmer. So it helps to increase that warmth. And your situation is when you've got that spleen yang or spleen qi deficiency, your body needs that warmth. So that's pretty much the answer to that. And then possibly, the other option would be to go to vegetarian. And I'm not saying have dairy, because I don't think dairy is a great product to have. Certainly for damp, it makes dampness heaps worse. Like if people are watching this and they think, oh, but I love dairy, so the dairy foods you could have would be cheese, or like not the creamier cheeses, but the harder cheeses, and fermented dairy like yogurt. But other dairies will just make you feel phlegmy. So yeah, that's good. But eggs are probably a good place. So even if you just went from vegan to vegetarian, and you just allowed yourself to eat some eggs every so often and have some bone broth, I think that would be helpful. Now, I get that you're probably not going to do that because you're probably vegan for ethical reasons as well, and that's okay. That's everyone's got their own personal views and rights and things like that. So if that's the case, then I'd say with the herbs, get onto some really warming herbs. And so you need to go down that classical Chinese herbs route to kind of get onto that. Okay, so he says he's got weak legs and muscles and brain fog are the main issues. So that weakness is, your body needs stuff to make it needs substance, it needs warmth to kind of help basically crank on that stomach, that spleen, the fire, the yang of the spleen. He says, I try to drink cinnamon and clove tea every morning and night, which is a great help to heal the internals. So that was what I was going to suggest to you as well when I was getting onto the idea of pungent foods. So you're already having some of these pungent things, and if you're finding that that's helping you, and you're finding like an affinity and a natural affinity, like, oh, I want this, my body's craving this, that's telling you probably going to need more yang tonic warming herbs. So there's particular herbs that we use that are even more stronger than cinnamon and clove and that. But so you have to get them prescribed by a practitioner who does classical herbs. The stock standard TCM practitioners don't use these kinds of hot yang tonic formulas. But what you can probably do is just include that pungence. So the diet advice I give you is, 1, don't exercise too much. Try not to sweat too much. Limit the amount of sweating that you're doing, because what you're sweating, you're drying the muscle out. Okay, next, make sure your diet's mostly warm, if all warm. So if you have grains, which you probably do as a vegan, so congee is a good thing to do. Rice porridge, porridge with oats, rather, like that's the most nourishing. Even though you say you've got dampness, you need to kind of nourish your body. You can roast the oats before you cook them into the porridge, which makes them less dampening. If you find that's causing you the foggy headedness, then go for barley. So barley is the least dampening of all of the grains, and make a porridge out of that. And if you can put the bone broth in there, so sneaking that in, if you can cook up your barley or your rice or whatever you're using for your porridge with the bone broth, that's good. If you can't do that, then just put your veggies with that and make a slow cooked, put it in the crock pot in the slow cooker and make a veggie porridge or veggie soup, even with a little bit of barley as part of the grains in there, and that'll be good. And then you want to use a lot of pungent, so you can cook with you can put your cinnamon and clove and all that sort of stuff into your soup if you want, or you can just add them as condiments kind of at the end. So anything like, apart from mint, like that's cooling pungent, but you want things like coriander, ginger, basil, clove and cinnamon, that's good. They're the main ones, and fennel, that's good. So you can use those in your cooking. Oregano, any of those kind of pungent, they're kind of moving. So aromatic means when you smell it, that's the same thing as pungent. It's basically opening, and that helps to disperse the damp. And when it's warm, it helps to kind of aid the spleen's ability to basically boost up that fire a little bit. Now, pungent will make you sweat if you have too much. So that's why I didn't say chili. So you want to avoid the chili, avoid the hot and spicy. It's the same mechanism of sweating too much from exercising. You don't want to have a lot of pungent to make you sweat. So you have just enough pungent to kind of moisten, like basically bring the yang and the qi, if you like, up to the outside of the body a little bit, but not enough to kind of push open your pores and make you sweat. So you could try a little bit of chili, but just it depends on your propensity for sweating. Don't put so much, like don't have a curry that makes you kind of sweat. So I hope that's been helpful for you. I hope it's been useful for the people that are watching this. If this has been useful for you, then put a comment below. Subscribe to my channel. I love to see people's comments, and I'm happy to answer people's questions. So thanks very much for asking this question. And if people want to ask more questions, please feel free to pop them in the comments. Thank you.